She never gave herself to anyone, until the Millionaire CEO gave her the best night of her life. Nora Bennett had learned how to live without letting anyone touch her heart, not because she was proud or distant by nature, but because she knew too well what it felt like to be left behind. That hollow, aching silence when someone walks away and you have to choose, break or survive. She had chosen to survive. She found safety in quiet routines, working at a small private art museum in Seattle, surrounded by canvases that spoke not with words but with shadows, light, and depth. Just like her. At 26, Nora had perfected the art of emotional evasion. Small talk, harmless flirtations, lingering glances. They all bounced off the calm in her eyes and the polite curve of her lips. Not cold, just unreachable. She didn't believe in fairy tales. Didn't believe that someone could walk into your life and change everything. She had watched love reduce strong women into shattered versions of themselves, had held her sister in trembling arms after a brutal betrayal, had seen the hollow look in her mother's eyes after her father left for someone younger, softer, easier. So Nora built walls, not to imprison herself, but to keep the world at a safe, controlled distance. Until one day a man walked into the gallery and brought with him the very thing she had spent her life trying to escape: feeling. That Tuesday afternoon began like every other, quiet, predictable, safe. Nora was rearranging the placards in the exhibition room titled The Stillness of Color, a collection of abstract works exploring the nuances of human emotion. Golden light filtered through the thick museum windows, casting nostalgic stripes across the polished wood floors. She loved the afternoons. They didn't ask her to talk, just to exist and feel. "Excuse me." The voice came softly from behind her, low, patient, yet it sliced through the quiet like a chord struck unexpectedly. Nora turned instinctively and froze. The man wore a storm gray shirt, sleeves rolled to his elbows, revealing sun-kissed forearms and a muted gold watch. His dark hair was slightly tousled, as if his hand had passed through it moments before. But it was his eyes that arrested her, dark, deep, like a doorway to another dimension. "Sorry if I startled you," he said, offering a half smile. "I'm Julian Blackwood. I have a meeting with the museum director, but I arrived a bit early." Nora nodded, steadying her breath. "I'm Nora Bennett. I'm the curator here." She extended her hand. His grip was firm but unhurried, and it sent a strange current up her spine. "I know," he said, eyes never leaving hers. "I've heard about how you stage your exhibits. Very immersive." It wasn't flattery, it wasn't flirtation, and somehow that made it more disarming. She nodded again, motioning toward the nearest painting. "Would you like to preview the collection? I can walk you through it." "I'd like that," Julian said, following her steps. They moved slowly past each canvas, shadows and soft light trailing their movements. Julian didn't speak much, but when he did, his words had weight. "Why do you think gray is the color of loneliness?" he asked, pausing before a piece titled Lost in White Space. Nora tilted her head slightly. "Because it's neutral, not dark enough to be sadness, not light enough to be hope. It just exists, like an emotion no one wants to name." Julian was silent. She could feel his gaze even as she avoided it. "That's probably the most accurate definition of loneliness I've ever heard," he said quietly. She tightened her grip on the guidebook. She didn't like being seen, especially not by someone who'd just stepped into her world 10 minutes ago. And yet something about his presence, unhurried, non-invasive, kept her from pulling away. As they ended the tour, Julian stopped before an empty frame, awaiting its new arrival. "Interesting," he mused. "Even emptiness can become part of the art." "Sometimes," Nora replied, "the silence says more than any color ever could." "Like silence itself," he looked at her. "It's a language, if someone's quiet enough to listen." This time she didn't look away, and for a fleeting moment, something shifted within her. Not a full emotion, just a space, touched. "Do you drink coffee, Nora?" he asked casually, as though the world hadn't just tipped slightly on its axis. "I'd like to hear more about how you read art, how you see things." She hesitated. Every old instinct screamed in protest, but something else, something new, made her nod. There's a small cafe just around the corner, she said softly. Julian smiled, a smile that felt like a whisper with gravity. Lead the way, Miss Bennett. And just like that, Nora stepped outside the first safe space she had built, where she once believed no one could ever get through. The little cafe sat tucked beneath a canopy of maple trees, just a block from the museum. It smelled of freshly ground beans, old wood, and whispered jazz. Julian chose a table in the corner, where the light softened and the world slowed down. Nora sat across from him, her cappuccino nestled between both hands like a shield. She didn't know why she said yes. Maybe because he hadn't pushed. Maybe because he was simply there. You always lean toward muted tones in your exhibitions, Julian began, voice low and even. Is that intentional or just your taste? She raised an eyebrow. I believe silence holds more power than brightness ever can. Stillness has its own language. Like people? He asked, eyes fixed on hers. Nora smiled faintly, not defensively, but not entirely at ease either. Maybe. Julian didn't rush to fill the quiet. That was what she noticed. Most men she'd met couldn't tolerate silence, but he let it live, as if silence was a space he understood, maybe even preferred. Have you always worked in the arts? He asked. No, I studied English literature, Nora replied, turning her cup slowly. But life shifted. I needed something practical. The museum was a compromise. Just enough reality, just enough dreaming. He nodded as though understanding more than she'd spoken aloud. I like how you see things, not just with your eyes, but with your emotions. She looked mildly unsettled, not by the compliment, but by the sincerity behind it. And you? She asked, her first question, voluntarily. Why art? I imagine a man like you could do anything else. Julian chuckled, no arrogance in the sound. I used to be in finance, market analysis, stocks, lots of money, no soul. She studied him a little longer. Something about his tone made her believe him. He'd lived another life before this one. Then one day I wandered into a small gallery in Prague. The painting wasn't beautiful in the usual way, but it made me cry. He smiled, a self-deprecating kind of smile. I hadn't cried since I was 15. Nora didn't smile back. She just looked at him, really looked, and she saw it. Beneath the confidence, there was someone who'd been hurt too. Someone who'd held a lot inside, like her. She spoke softly. I've never cried over a painting, but there was a poem once that kept me awake all night. Julian tilted his head. Which one? One Art, by Elizabeth Bishop. He nodded. The art of losing isn't hard to master. Nora stared at him, this time genuinely surprised. Not many people remember that line. Not many people admit how much they've lost. Silence returned, but this time it wasn't heavy. It was soft, like a song that ends right on cue. They sat there, not saying much more. Two people with coffees and untold aches. And on that gray, soft afternoon, with music in the background and warmth between sips, something, fragile but honest, began to grow. A week after the cafe, Nora received a short email from Julian. This Friday evening, I'm hosting a preview of a new exhibit at my private gallery. Just a few invited guests. I'd really like you to come. Jay. She reread it multiple times, unsure of how to respond. Part of her wanted to decline, like always. But the other part, the one gently awakened on that rainy afternoon, typed, I'll be there. Julian's gallery sat on the top floor of a glass building where Seattle unfolded like a living canvas of lights. There weren't many people, just a few familiar faces from the art world in a modest wine bar. But when Nora stepped inside, the air shifted. Julian was speaking with an older artist. The moment their eyes met, he politely excused himself and crossed the room to her. Nora, he said, her name slipping from his lips like a melody. Thank you for coming. This exhibit, is it yours? She asked, glancing briefly around. Ours, he smiled. I co-curated it with a group of emerging artists. Every piece explores the idea of first sight, that moment when everything changes. She paused, then turned to him. Do you believe in that kind of moment? I believe there are glances you can't take back, he said, Like when I walked into the gallery that day and saw you." Nora didn't answer. Not because she didn't know what to say, but because her heart was beating far too loudly to form words. They walked slowly through the exhibit. Some paintings were warm, others wild, some whispering things only two people might understand. At the final piece, an abstract canvas in deep ocean blues, Julian stopped. "This one reminds me of you," he said. "Why?" "Because it's quiet to the point of aching," he said. "But if you stay long enough, you'll see all the layers moving beneath, like waves, subtle but powerful." The space around them felt suddenly too small for all the things unspoken. "Would you like to see the rooftop?" he asked. "It's quieter up there." On the rooftop, the city sprawled below them, its lights like a miniature galaxy. The breeze carried a whisper of salt from the sound, and distant traffic rumbled like waves. "This is where I escape everything," Julian said. "But tonight, I don't want to escape." Nora looked at him, his features carved by the soft gold of rooftop lighting. She didn't know what possessed her, only that in the next breath, she stepped forward and gently touched his hand. Julian turned. He didn't kiss her right away. He just looked, like he needed to be sure she was there, not just in body, but in trust. "Are you sure?" he asked, barely a whisper. "No," Nora said honestly, "but I'm here." Her words unlocked something between them. Their first kiss wasn't rushed. It was a question, a softness. Then it deepened, gradually, like learning to speak with skin and breath instead of words. When they found their way to the private studio behind the gallery, soft lights, a half-open window, Nora felt her defenses melting. Not because Julian was perfect, but because for the first time in her life, she didn't feel like she had to perform. Not the strong girl, not the distant one, not the one in control, just herself. And in his arms, beneath trembling skin and reverent kisses, Nora felt something simple, tender, and utterly profound. "I am worthy of being loved." And in his arms, beneath trembling skin and reverent kisses, Nora felt something simple, tender, and utterly profound. "I am worthy of being loved." But for those who've been hurt before, love can feel like a cliff's edge. The closer you get to joy, the more terrified you are of the fall. Nora woke before dawn. The room was soft with half light, and Julian lay beside her, his face peaceful in sleep. She sat up slowly, as if afraid to disturb something delicate. The room still smelled like them, like skin, warmth, and the intimacy they had just shared. But instead of peace, she felt panic. Not because Julian had done anything wrong, but because she had felt too much, and it had felt real, too real. Fear crept in like a cold fog. What if this was all temporary? What if letting herself believe cost her everything? She dressed in silence and left a simple note. "Thank you for last night. Please don't come after me. Eerie N." And then she slipped out of that room, as if it were the only way she could breathe again. The drive back to her apartment was barely 10 minutes, but that morning, it felt like winter stretched out across every block. She watched the streetlights blur past the car window, each one stabbing a little deeper than the last. She arrived at the museum early. The staff greeted her as always. Visitors came and went. No one knew that last night. She had let herself fall, and now she was clawing her way back to the surface. She tried to work, reviewing exhibit plans, reorganizing artist bios. She even forced herself to sit for over an hour sorting archival paperwork. She needed to stay busy, desperately. But everything reminded her of Julian, the coffee mug he once held, the trace of his cologne on a stranger's coat, the painting they'd lingered on together, lost in white space. It all felt like cuts, small, slow, constant. In the archive room, her hands shook, not from cold, but from memory. Everything returned like waves, his eyes, his hand on her back, their breath in sync beneath soft light, and worst of all, his gentleness. Julian hadn't made promises, he hadn't pressured her, but his tenderness made her feel something she hadn't felt in years. Safe, and that scared her more than anything. What if she let go, trusted, and he left? Could she survive that? She had watched her mother break apart after love walked away, had held her sister through betrayal and abandonment. She knew what love cost. By noon, she looked at her phone. 3 missed calls. 1 message. Nora, are you okay? I'm worried. Her hand trembled. She didn't delete the message, but she didn't answer either. She turned the phone face down and turned off her feelings, returning to the only version of herself she trusted, the woman who needed no one, even if deep down she already missed him in a way that quietly hurt. Even after locking her phone, her heart, and every exit that might lead back to him, Nora still found herself leaning toward one direction, the space where Julian once looked at her. And then she realized she couldn't hide forever. Wednesday afternoon, the museum was as quiet as ever. Nora was in the archives, sorting old exhibit records, desperately keeping her thoughts tethered to tasks. The door creaked open. Footsteps, steady, unmistakable, made her freeze in place. Julian. He stood beneath the soft yellow lights, face calm, voice low. But his eyes, they were tired and hurt. How long were you planning to avoid me? He asked. No anger, just truth. Nora's body stiffened. You shouldn't be here. Then where should I be? He replied, voice sharp in its gentleness. You left a note, then vanished. She said nothing. Julian stepped closer. If that night was a mistake, you can say it. If you felt nothing, you can say that too. But don't pretend I never existed. Her throat closed. She owed him words, but they were stuck somewhere deeper than language. Julian exhaled. I thought I understood you. The quiet, the caution, the walls. I thought I could take my time, but now I'm not so sure. She turned, avoiding his eyes. I didn't know what to do, Julian. I'm not used to being seen, being close. So you ran? He asked, voice tight. Because you're afraid of being loved? Nora closed her eyes, a breath long and heavy. I'm afraid of losing. Afraid that if I let myself believe and you leave, I'll have nothing left. Silence filled the room. Heavy, thick. Julian spoke again, quietly. I've been left too, Nora. I've been afraid, but I don't punish the person who shows up because someone else didn't stay. His words landed deep. She looked at him, really looked, and saw he wasn't here to demand. He was here because he hadn't left. I don't know how to trust, she whispered. He stepped closer, only a breath away. Then let me wait, but tell me, what do you want? Nora stayed silent for a long time, then, barely audible. I don't know, but I miss you. Julian's expression softened, but he didn't reach for her. I'm not asking for an apology, he said gently, just to know that I wasn't alone in what I felt that night. It was real, she said, like a confession. He nodded. Then live with that truth. When you're ready, I'll still be here. He turned to leave. No pleading, no guilt. And that, more than anything, made her heart ache in ways words never could. Julian had walked away, not angry, not bitter, and somehow it was that quiet exit, without drama or demand, that left Nora feeling more hollow than ever. In the stillness that followed, she knew she needed someone, not to fix what happened with Julian, but to understand herself. She thought of Clara. Clara lived in a small apartment just north of Seattle, where afternoon light filtered through the curtains and scattered toys on the floor told the story of a life still moving forward. Nora arrived unannounced. Clara only smiled, not surprised, not asking questions. She was used to her sister showing up wordlessly. You okay? Clara asked, setting 2 mugs of tea on the table. I don't know, Nora replied, gripping the cup. There's this man, and I think I ruined everything. Clara didn't respond right away. She looked at her sister for a long time, like she was reading through the layers Nora had carefully built over the years. You know, Clara began softly, I once loved someone so much I lost pieces of myself. When he left, I didn't think I'd ever breathe again. Nora looked up, eyes damp. I used to believe love had to hurt, that it required sacrifice and the willingness to be left behind. But I learned that wasn't love. That was fear. I'm not sure I understand, Nora said quietly. Clara smiled gently. No judgment, no rush. Sometimes we confuse pain with love. We think if someone has the power to hurt us, then the love must be real. But real love doesn't make you shrink. It makes you grow. It opens you up, lightens you. Nora stared into her tea. I ran because I thought if he ever left, I wouldn't survive it. I've seen too many people left behind. But if you don't try this time, Clara said, voice low and steady, then you've already left yourself behind. In that moment, something shifted. Nora realized she'd been punishing her present for the wounds of her past. She wasn't rejecting love because it wasn't real. She was rejecting it because she didn't believe she could keep it. Clara reached across the table and held her hand. If you still think about him, then let your heart say what your fear hasn't. Clara's words echoed in Nora's mind like a quiet bell. Maybe she had stayed silent for too long. This time she wanted to be different. That afternoon, as the museum closed its doors, Nora picked up her car keys and stepped out, without looking back. On the drive to Julian's gallery, she focused on one thing only. If there was still a chance, she wouldn't run from it again. Her heart pounded. Her hand trembled slightly as she rang the bell. But when the door opened, it wasn't Julian. It was one of his gallery assistants, the man she remembered from the last preview. Julian flew to New York this morning, he said gently. He's working on a new project. He'll be there for a few weeks. The words felt like a cold breeze, not painful, but hollowing. Nora nodded, whispered a soft, "Thank you," and walked away, slowly, as if every step asked her to hold something down. That evening, she sat by the window, the city lights flickering across her glass of wine. She didn't cry. She didn't hide. For the first time in a long while, she sat with herself, fully present. Nora opened her notebook. The first sentence came slowly, then another, then more, lines she had never spoken aloud. I was scared, not because you hurt me, but because you showed me something I didn't believe existed anymore. Care without condition. I'm still learning how to hold that, slowly. But if you still want to hear, I want to tell you everything. She wrote, not to beg, but to be honest. And sometimes when the truth is written from the heart, it finds its way back home. Julian returned on a quiet early autumn weekend when the wind carried the scent of damp wood and the soft gold of a fading sun. He came back to the gallery expecting nothing, just returning, nothing more. But the first person he saw through the glass doors was Nora. She stood alone in the stillness, gazing at a newly hung painting. Soft strokes of blue brushed like breath across canvas. When she heard the familiar footsteps, she turned. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other, like two travelers meeting again at the same crossroad after losing their way. No accusations, no rehearsed apologies. Just the silence of recognition, raw, unshaken. And in it, everything they had carried alone finally found a place to rest. It was Nora who spoke first. I wrote to you, she said, but I wasn't sure if you'd read it. I did, Julian replied. More than once. She nodded, clutching her bag a little tighter. I was afraid, not because you did anything wrong, but because you were right. I'm not used to being loved without a cost. Julian stepped forward, slow, steady. You don't have to pay to be loved, Nora. You just have to be yourself. This time she didn't step back, didn't flinch. She let the tears fall, not from weakness, but because she was finally done pretending to be strong. I missed you, she whispered, and I love you, but I still need to learn how to trust. Can you wait? Julian smiled, a quiet sunset kind of smile. I've already waited, and I will again if it brings me back here. He opened his arms, not to pull, not to beg, but to offer. And this time Nora stepped in, not out of fear, not out of guilt, but by choice, with a heart finally ready to be held. Their embrace was different now, no longer a bandage but a beginning, not a return to something broken, but a promise of something whole. When Julian leaned in to kiss her, it wasn't a question anymore. It was a vow. No longer a love built on fear, no longer a dance between hesitation and retreat. 6 months had passed, and Nora and Julian had lived enough together to know love doesn't need to be perfect, just real and patient. And today they were in Santorini, where the sun kisses the sea and the sea keeps the secrets of lovers. Nora leaned back on the lounge chair overlooking the bay, her espresso long gone cold in her hand. But she didn't care. In front of her, Santorini shimmered in late daylight, white, blue, and glowing like a dream still breathing. Julian was in the small kitchen, fussing with dinner. He wouldn't let her help. "Your job is to watch the sunset," he'd said earlier, kissing her forehead. 6 months. Everything had changed, and yet nothing had. She was still Nora, quiet, sharp, sometimes too logical. But inside she was a new version, braver, softer, and willing to believe in something lasting. Julian hadn't changed much. Steady, thoughtful, always listening. He never rushed her. He just stayed, with patience, with presence. Nora had decided to return to school, pursuing her master's in art history. It made her nervous and alive again. Julian was her first cheerleader. "If it lights you up when you talk about it, you have to follow it," he'd said. He stayed up with her through long nights of reading, proofread her essays, brought her tea without being asked. Not loud, just there. And that had made all the difference. That evening, he called her out to the terrace. Nora came, light dress floating in the breeze, hair pinned up, smile easy, unguarded. Julian stood waiting, 2 glasses of wine in hand. The last sunbeams painted gold on the white walls behind him, casting a scene that looked almost unreal. They clinked glasses, no words needed. A few moments later, he set his glass down, took a slow, deliberate breath. "Nora." She turned toward him. Her eyes still made the world feel right. "I used to think I wouldn't fall in love again, not because I didn't want to, but because I thought maybe I missed my chance." She didn't speak, just listened. "Then I met you, and you complicated everything, but also, you clarified everything. You're unlike anyone, and with you, I want to be better, every day." Then, almost too quietly, he dropped to one knee. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to still. The sea, the wind, even Nora's breath. In his hand was a ring, simple, elegant, unadorned. The kind of beauty that didn't need to shout. The kind of beauty that reminded her of the way he had always held her, with quiet, unwavering care. Nora Bennett, if you've learned how to trust, then trust this. I'm not going anywhere. Not when you're joyful, not when you're afraid, not when you need silence. I'll stay and walk with you, wherever this road leads. She brought her hand to her mouth. Tears spilled, not out of surprise, but because every word was true. She didn't need time. She didn't need certainty. "Yes," she whispered, "I do." When Julian stood and pulled her into his arms, the sky had turned lilac. The breeze carried salt and the chill of early fall. They kissed, no longer a question of, can we, but a promise. We are. Nora closed her eyes, and in that moment, she knew. The past was no longer a shadow. It had become the foundation for a present that was real and a future unfolding gently beneath the Santorini sky. For Nora, love had once been a scar she refused to touch, a shadow she could only run from. But now looking back, she knew. Love hadn't made her weaker. It had made her braver. The Santorini night spread deep blue across the horizon, the sea shimmering under the moon. Nora sat on the balcony, the wind brushing past her, the ring on her finger catching the light like a small star. She thought of the past 6 months. The moment Julian first walked into the museum, the first coffee they shared, the silences that grew lighter, turning into their secret language. She thought of the night she ran, of the note she left on the wooden table, of the days she punished herself in silence, and then of the confrontation in the archives, where every wall cracked and she finally saw herself. Each memory was like a fragment of glass, together forming the most honest portrait of who she was, imperfect, uneven, but real. Slowly, Nora understood. She had never needed someone to save her. What she needed was someone who would stay to see her exactly as she was. No more, no less, no disguise. Julian had done that, not with grand promises, but with patience. He hadn't stepped into her life to change it. He had simply stood beside her, so that when she turned, she'd know there was a place to rest without losing herself. Love, she thought, isn't about finding the safest place. There is no such place. Anyone can leave. Anything can vanish. Love, she whispered, is about finding the place where you can be most true, where you dare to reveal the parts you fear most, the scars, the softness, the unfinished dreams, and still be accepted, still be loved. She turned toward Julian, busy arranging photos of the sunset on the table. So absorbed he didn't notice her gaze. She smiled, a smile with no shadow of fear, no trace of retreat. She had once believed love would unravel her, strip her of control. But in truth, this love had given her strength. The strength to face herself and to choose what she truly wanted. A heart that is loved does not shrink. It expands, not because it's filled, but because it's free to open. Nora looked down at her hand, where the ring shimmered beneath the silver moonlight. She closed her eyes, breathing deeply. This wasn't an ending. It was a beginning, imperfect, but real. And she knew from this moment on, every sunrise, every sunset would no longer echo with the fear of loss, but with the quiet proof of a truth she had once run from. She had chosen to love, and in choosing, she had chosen life itself.